Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to, I was going to say it's lovely to see you. Of course, I actually can only see the camera, but we know that you're there, and it's lovely to have you with us on this Wednesday lunchtime, and time for another bite-sized Baroque from Ensemble Hesperi. This week we're exploring again some of London's forgotten organ composers on the harpsichord. And today we've got a mixture of familiar and less familiar. And the programme really is, it's Purcell to begin with and Purcell to close, and then some less well-known composers in the middle. I've got also a couple of things to talk about as we go through today. A couple of people have got in touch with some very interesting questions, and I'll try and answer some of those as we go through. I'm going to begin with a very, very well-known keyboard piece by Purcell. It's called a ground. So it's basically a repeating pattern, and over that he makes variations, one of the most common types of piece in the Baroque period, and of course it's the sort of music that can easily be improvised on. This piece is perhaps actually by the composer William Croft, the slightly younger composer, who was also a Chapel Royal composer and organist of Westminster Abbey. And it uses something called the steel breezing, which is basically a type of playing which mimics the playing of lutes and theorbos and guitars. It sort of sounds like it's being plucked. And it's a really wonderful piece to start off today's programme. quite an amazing piece, that, and it sort of builds up an incredible sense of momentum throughout those variations, and with the returning material there in between each variation, particularly kind of haunting, really, and very evocative. And actually reminds me, I don't know if it reminds any of you, of pieces like Purcell's Music for a While. It's got particularly the same sort of gestures and ideas in there. Now we're going to go to the sort of unofficial star of this mini-series, Abele Wicello. And as you know, we're working through his harpsichord pieces, which are really the only pieces of instrumental music that we have by this composer. Today's offering is rather short. I've actually split up the pieces from his collection, or as they're known, lessons, into little groups. And I think he intended them to be in these groups. They're arranged by key. So today is the A minor key, the little bit in the middle. And actually in A minor we only have an Allemande, a courante, and then a sarabande. So it's a very short little bit. Next time's D major section is a little bit bigger. And again, this is very beautiful music. And I hope that you enjoy listening to this simple Allemande, courante, and sarabande. The Allemande is very typical Allemande of the period, and it starts with this tartam gesture, and then it has lots of running material. The courante is a triple time piece, and always follows the Allemande. They always go together. And then the sarabande is a slow a slow piece in triple time. very simple music but very effective music by Abele cello. He likes to use these bottom notes of the harpsichord, and actually when I was listening back to a little recording I was doing when practicing, it's quite extraordinary actually. He goes down here and then up there into a completely different register, so that takes a little bit of time to let those notes sound. Now, a question that's come in from someone is a very interesting one and concerns early fingering, or what sometimes people call original fingering, early fingering, or even paired fingering. And the question was, do I use it, and what do I think of it, etc. In brief, yes, I do use it, and I'll just explain a little bit about it. Basically, there's lots of different documents from the past from composers, often at the beginning of pieces of music. For example, in the Purcell Suites and lessons, he actually gives a table of ornaments at the beginning, and he gives a system of fingering for how to basically do the fingering for a scale. And although slightly different composers in different periods have a couple of variants, basically it's to do with pairing the fingering and not really using the thumb as much as we might do today. If you learn the piano now and you start a C major scale, your teacher might tell you to do fingering 1, 2, 3, thumb under, and then run through the fingers like this. Whereas what Purcell tells us is to actually use 1, 2, 3, 4, and then instead of putting your thumb under, do another 3, 4, and then just shift your hand 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, like this. So that's basically how it works. Going up and going down, it's the same, but you use 3 and 2. And then you can do the same in the left hand, of course. It creates a very wonderful sound, and it's something that I try and employ in my playing where I can. I think it's one of those elements of playing where some people are more sort of strict than others about it. And I think you have to make it work for the particular situation that you're in. It works particularly well in this repertoire, and on the harpsichord like this it works really nicely. I think it was in the Francis Piggott that I was playing a couple of weeks ago. It starts with a scale like this, and you get some very nice little articulations and pairings in there. So that's a very interesting element of keyboard playing. And one which is debated quite a lot, but it adds a really wonderful element to this music. I'm just going to have a quick look down at these comments here and see what is going here. Jan, yes, I've just seen your message there. We're so sorry to hear that sad news, particularly at such a difficult time for everyone. And absolutely, I particularly like to dedicate the final piece of the programme, the Purcell Suite, to the memory of your friend. But actually, the whole of this concert absolutely is a real honour to give this performance in honour of your friend. Now, we go to a very unknown character now, called John Bennett. John Bennett was the organist of a church called St. Dionys Back Church. That's a church which was demolished in the Victorian period, but there's actually a church in an area of London called Parsons Green, called St. Dionys, and that was built with the money from the selling of the site near Fenchurch Street in the City of London, when a lot of churches were removed, often to make way for the underground to be built, for big bridges and wider roads to be made. In that period of great change, they often used the money to buy a church, build a church in an area of London where the population is growing. And so that church just sort of still exists in its memory. And it's also where the very famous musician Charles Burney was the organist. We don't know much about Bennett. He's one of those composers who we happen to have 10 voluntaries for the organ or harpsichord by him, and this is one of them. He was there for over 30 years. It's believed that he also had employment in a couple of other churches, and that was something that was very common, because in order to make a living as a musician, you had to job around, and you often would hold 2 or 3 organ posts, and you'd often get your students to actually cover for your services in different ones. And we know this because there's some very amusing anecdotes, particularly in the contracts and in the minutes of the vestries, or this sort of, the church warden's reports, where when an organist was appointed to a job, it was in their contract that they had to really be there for a certain number of occasions, because it was obviously a practice where people got their student to come along and play for them. So I think that's probably the case in John Bennett's case. And of course it sounds like they were trying to be very grand, but actually they were probably just trying to make a living in a very difficult time. But John Bennett was also a viola player. He played and sung in the Drury Lane Theatre, and he was a very sort of jobbing musician. This is really an organ voluntary as well as a harpsichord voluntary, and a couple of you have commented over the week about how it's interesting that this music is for either instrument, partly because you couldn't very often practice this repertoire, and of course they wanted to be more up there with the marketing, because if you marketed it for keyboard generally, then you've got a bigger market. It's a voluntary with a very short introduction, very beautiful introduction actually, and then an allegro, a quite astonishing adagio in the middle with lots of chromatic writing, moving in semitones, and really it's an improvisation really, and then a fugue at the end. The fugue is not it's not a fugue in the same style as, for example, a Bach fugue. It's far less developed, but it's because it's much more of an improvised tradition here. But very wonderful piece. I hope you enjoy it. John Bennett's Voluntary Number 9 in F, for want of a more snazzy title. I was just thinking how astonishingly high that piece goes. It goes right to the top of this instrument, top D. And on a Baroque organ, that's also right at the top end of the range. So very striking there. Right. Well, our last piece today is a Purcell, Henry Purcell Suite, and I just wanted to explain a little bit because another question would come in this week about the role of preludes in this type of music. Well, preludes, which we don't have in the Wicello suites, strangely enough. A prelude basically is an opportunity to try out the stops, try out the sound, try out the tuning, and it's part of the suite, of course, but it's not really part of the dance movements of the suite, the stylized dance movements. So that's why they're particularly improvised, and this one from the Purcell Suite is a good way of just showing you a little bit about how that works. It's basically very simple harmonies decorated out, and they could be decorated and improvised in loads of different ways according to the player, according to the instrument, according to the occasion. If it was a very ceremonial occasion, if it was a small domestic occasion, lots of different things. So this first prelude just starts like this. Now all that is just sort of noodling around a D major chord. So it's basically just made of these notes. And the other ones just fill in. And then it does a bit more D major. Just a scale. And the new note comes in to create this harmony. There's a G chord, then this chord. And that's decorated by a little gesture in the right hand. And then a sequence starts. Of course, Baroque music's full of sequences. More D major. And then C natural comes in. That's a very interesting colour. And then it does this. Which is basically just decorating. And then it comes to rest on a low A. And A is a very important note within D major because it's what we call our dominant note or our fifth note, and it's going to create the cadence, create the ending. And then that just decorates this. It's basically just a cadence. Decorated like this. And the ending is really just a written out spread chord. So that's basically how these pieces work. It's basically this chord, this chord, this chord, mini sequence, and that. If I were to synthesize it down into the smallest elements. And this has got then an Allemande, and slightly unusually, the last movement is a hornpipe. Stylized dance, of course, triple time dance, and a very nice way to end today's concert. So, Jan, this piece I particularly dedicate to the memory of your friend, as well as the whole of today's concert. So I hope you enjoy listening to this piece. It's Henry Purcell's Suite No. 6 in D. the sound go off? Apologies if it did. Any Babel, please? Yes, I will be bringing some Babel to you in the next harpsichord one, Jan.
And next week.
And next week as well. Wonderful composer Babel, and but someone I've been thinking a lot about recently, and since we discovered some of his recorder pieces. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of some more undiscovered composers from the City of London, and we look forward to seeing you at the same time, in the same place, next week. Take care. Bye-bye.